The human mind may seem like a simple filter for reality, but it is not what you think, because beneath the surface lies what Aldous Huxley called mind at large, a vast ocean of consciousness that we typically cannot access. This hidden realm of perception exists beyond our everyday awareness, waiting to be discovered through what Huxley described as the cleansing of the doors of perception. If we continue to ignore the profound insights about consciousness that Huxley explored in The Doors of Perception, we risk living within the narrow confines of ordinary perception, missing the extraordinary depth and richness of experience that lies just beyond our everyday awareness. The consequences extend beyond mere philosophical curiosity. They affect how we understand our place in the universe, how we relate to one another, and ultimately how we define the very nature of reality itself. In May 1953, in Los Angeles, Aldous Huxley conducted a remarkable experiment. Under supervision, he ingested 0.4 grams of mescaline, the active hallucinogen from the peyote cactus sacred to indigenous Mexicans. What followed was not merely a drug-induced hallucination, but a philosophical journey that would challenge conventional understanding of human consciousness. Huxley documented this experience in his seminal work, The Doors of Perception, published in 1954, borrowing its title from William Blake's observation. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. Huxley was already a renowned intellectual by this time. Born in 1894 to an established British family with deep connections to scientific and literary circles, he had established himself as one of the most penetrating minds of his generation. His grandfather was T.H. Huxley, the biologist known as Darwin's bulldog for his advocacy of evolutionary theory, while his brother Julian was a distinguished biologist. Aldous himself had published numerous works, including the dystopian masterpiece Brave New World in 1932, which warned of a future where humanity's pursuit of pleasure and stability would lead to the sacrifice of freedom and authentic human experience. By the time of his mescaline experiment, Huxley had already been exploring alternative modes of consciousness and Eastern philosophical traditions for years. Partially blind since an illness in his youth, Huxley had developed a keen interest in visual perception and the nature of consciousness. His mescaline experiment was not undertaken lightly or recreationally, but as a serious philosophical investigation into the nature of mind and reality, a scientific and spiritual exploration in the tradition of William James's Varieties of Religious Experience. At the core of Huxley's exploration lies the concept of mind at large, a revolutionary idea suggesting that our ordinary consciousness represents only a fraction of reality. Drawing on philosopher Henry Bergson's model, Huxley proposed that the brain functions not as a producer of consciousness, but as a reducing valve that filters the overwhelming totality of possible awareness down to a manageable trickle of information necessary for biological survival. This perspective inverts the common materialist assumption that the brain generates consciousness, suggesting instead that consciousness is primary, and the brain's role is to limit and focus it for practical purposes. Huxley writes, "Each person is at each moment capable of remembering all that has ever happened to him and of perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe. The function of the brain and nervous system is to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by this mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge, leaving only that very small and special selection which is likely to be practically useful. This filtering mechanism, he argues, is what allows us to navigate daily life without being constantly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of sensory information and potential awareness available to us. But this filtering comes at a tremendous cost. We become prisoners of our limited perception, seeing only what is immediately useful rather than what is truly there." Under the influence of mescaline, Huxley experienced a temporary lifting of this filter, allowing him to perceive what he described as the miracle, moment by moment, of naked existence. The ordinary world was transformed not into something fantastical or hallucinatory, but rather revealed in its true nature, unburdened by the utilitarian filters of everyday perception. What Huxley encountered was profound. "I was seeing what Adam had seen on the morning of his creation," he wrote. Ordinary objects lost their functionality and instead revealed their intrinsic nature. A chair was no longer merely a tool for sitting, but revealed its miraculous tubularity and supernatural, polished smoothness. The folds in his trousers became objects of fascination and beauty. Colors intensified, patterns emerged, and the world appeared to shine with the inner light. Space was transformed, with objects seeming to breathe and pulsate with an inner vitality that is normally hidden from awareness. Huxley described looking at a small vase containing 3 flowers. The vase contained only 3 flowers. But what flowers? Rose, shell pink, pearl white, deep crimson, at once infinitely subtle and intensely alive. I continued to look at the flowers, and in their living light I seemed to detect the qualitative equivalent of breathing, but of a breathing without returns to a starting point, without recurrent ebbs but only a repeated flow from beauty to heightened beauty, from deeper to ever deeper meaning. This experience led Huxley to a striking conclusion that what we typically perceive as reality is merely a useful construction, a tiny island in a vast sea of possible awareness. Our normal consciousness, he suggested, is not the only valid form of perception, but rather one that has been evolutionarily selected for its survival value rather than its completeness or truth. The man who comes back through the door in the wall will never be quite the same as the man who went out, Huxley observed. The experience permanently altered his understanding of consciousness and reality. Importantly, Huxley did not view this altered state as merely a curious distortion or hallucination. Instead, he considered it a glimpse into a more fundamental reality, what he termed the sacramental vision of reality, or how things really are. This perspective aligns with mystical traditions across cultures and throughout history that have sought to transcend ordinary perception through meditation, fasting, or ritual practices. Huxley noted the similarities between his mescaline experience and the accounts of mystics from diverse traditions, suggesting that these experiences point toward a universal aspect of consciousness typically hidden from everyday awareness. Huxley was particularly struck by the parallels between his experience and the descriptions found in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, various Christian mystical texts, and the writings of William Blake. He observed that across cultures and throughout history, humans have consistently reported similar experiences when the reducing valve of ordinary consciousness is temporarily bypassed. This universality suggested to him that these experiences were not merely cultural constructs or hallucinations, but glimpses of a deeper reality normally filtered out by our practical consciousness. The philosophical implications of Huxley's insights extend far beyond the specific context of his mescaline experiment. They challenge our fundamental understanding of consciousness itself. If the brain acts primarily as a filter rather than a generator of consciousness, this suggests that awareness may be more fundamental to reality than our materialist scientific paradigm typically acknowledges. As Huxley put it, to make biological survival possible, mind at large has to be funneled through the reducing valve of the brain and nervous system. This view directly contradicts the dominant materialist perspective that consciousness is merely an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of brain activity with no independent existence. Instead, it suggests that consciousness might be primary, with the brain serving as a receiver or transmitter rather than a creator. This perspective aligns with what philosophers call idealism or panpsychism, the view that consciousness or mind is fundamental to reality, rather than an emergent property of physical processes. Huxley's perspective also resonates with quantum physics observer effect and the Copenhagen interpretation, which suggest that consciousness may play a role in the collapse of quantum wave functions. While Huxley did not directly engage with quantum physics in The Doors of Perception, his model of consciousness as fundamental rather than derivative aligns with interpretations of quantum mechanics that place consciousness in a central role in the manifestation of reality. The implications of this perspective are profound. If consciousness extends beyond the individual brain, then we might all be connected at a deeper level, islands of awareness in a universal sea of mind. This resonates with Huxley's observation that in the final stage of egolessness there is an obscure knowledge that all is in all, that all is actually each. This is as near, I take it, as a finite mind can ever come to perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe. This interconnectedness of consciousness has ethical implications as well. If we are not fundamentally separate entities but manifestations of a unified consciousness, then our treatment of others and the natural world takes on new significance. Huxley noted that his mescaline experience produced a profound sense of empathy and connection with all beings, a dissolution of the boundaries that typically separate self from other. This experience of unity has been reported by mystics throughout history and forms the basis for ethical systems based on compassion and interconnection rather than self-interest. Yet Huxley was not advocating for permanent escape into visionary states. He acknowledged the practical necessity of filtered perception for daily functioning and recognized that prolonged visionary states could disconnect one from practical concerns and human relations. The ideal, he suggested, was to find a balance, to maintain the ability to function in ordinary reality while retaining access to the broader awareness of mind at large. This balance is what many spiritual traditions have sought through disciplined practices that allow for controlled access to non-ordinary states of consciousness. Huxley was also careful to distinguish between the genuine insights available through altered states and the potential for self-deception or delusion. He noted that while mescaline opened the doors of perception, it did not guarantee wisdom or understanding. The experience needed to be integrated into a broader philosophical framework to be truly valuable. As he put it, the man who comes back through the door in the wall will never be quite the same as the man who went out. He will be wiser but less cocksure, happier but less self-satisfied, humbler in acknowledging his ignorance yet better equipped to understand the relationship of words to things, of systematic reasoning to the unfathomable mystery which it tries, forever vainly, to comprehend. In his later work, Heaven and Hell, 1956, Huxley expanded on these themes, exploring the various ways humans have sought to access these broader realms of consciousness throughout history. He examined how art, architecture, music, and religious rituals have been designed to evoke transcendent experiences, to temporarily bypass the reducing valve of ordinary consciousness and provide glimpses of mind at large. From the stained glass windows of Gothic cathedrals to the intricate mandalas of Tibetan Buddhism, humans have created technologies of transcendence designed to shift perception beyond its ordinary boundaries. Huxley also explored the darker aspects of non-ordinary consciousness in Heaven and Hell, acknowledging that not all experiences beyond the reducing valve are blissful or illuminating. Just as religious traditions speak of both heavenly and hellish realms, altered states can reveal both the beatific and the terrifying aspects of existence. This recognition adds nuance to Huxley's exploration, acknowledging that the expansion of consciousness is not without risks or challenges. In his final novel, Island, 1962, published the year of his death, Huxley presented a vision of a society that had successfully integrated the insights of expanded consciousness into a balanced way of life. Unlike the dystopian Brave New World, where drugs were used to pacify and control the population, the fictional island of Pala used a substance called moksha medicine as part of a carefully designed educational and spiritual system. This fictional portrayal represented Huxley's mature vision of how altered states might be responsibly integrated into a healthy society, not as an escape from reality, but as a tool for deeper engagement with it. Huxley's exploration of consciousness continues to resonate today, particularly as scientific research into psychedelics experiences a renaissance. After decades of prohibition and stigma, researchers at institutions like Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London, and New York University are conducting rigorous studies on the therapeutic and consciousness-expanding potential of substances like psilocybin, LSD, and DMT. Modern neuroscience is beginning to provide empirical support for some of Huxley's intuitions, showing how psychedelics can indeed reduce the brain's filtering activities and allow for novel connections and perceptions. Neuroimaging studies have shown that psychedelics like psilocybin decrease activity in the brain's default mode network, a set of interconnected regions associated with self-referential thinking and the maintenance of the ego boundary. This reduction in the brain's controlling or filtering mechanisms aligns remarkably well with Huxley's reducing valve theory, suggesting that his philosophical insights may have anticipated findings that neuroscience would only confirm decades later. Contemporary researchers like Robin Carhart Harris and David Nutt have proposed the entropic brain hypothesis, suggesting that psychedelics increase the entropy or disorder in brain activity, allowing for more flexible and less constrained patterns of thought and perception. This modern scientific framework provides a neurological basis for understanding how the reducing valve might be temporarily bypassed, allowing access to a broader spectrum of consciousness. Beyond the scientific validation, Huxley's ideas continue to influence contemporary philosophy of mind. Philosophers like David Chalmers, who famously articulated the hard problem of consciousness, the difficulty of explaining how physical brain processes give rise to subjective experience, have acknowledged the possibility that consciousness may be more fundamental than our materialist paradigm typically allows. While not necessarily endorsing Huxley's specific model, contemporary philosophy of mind has increasingly recognized the limitations of purely reductive materialist approaches to consciousness. The question remains: how might we integrate these insights into our understanding of consciousness and our approach to human experience? Can we find ways to temporarily cleanse the doors of perception without the potential risks of psychedelic substances? Practices like meditation, deep aesthetic engagement, and contemplative traditions offer potential pathways, though perhaps less dramatic ones. Huxley himself became increasingly interested in contemplative practices in his later years, exploring how disciplines like meditation might offer more controlled access to the realms beyond ordinary perception. The integration of Huxley's insights remains a challenge for our contemporary culture. On one hand, there is growing scientific interest in altered states of consciousness and their potential benefits. On the other hand, our society remains largely organized around the utilitarian values that the reducing valve evolved to serve. We value productivity, efficiency, and practical problem solving. All functions of the filtered consciousness that Huxley suggested was only a tiny fraction of our potential awareness. Perhaps the most valuable aspect of Huxley's exploration is not any specific claim about consciousness, but the invitation to question our assumptions about the nature of perception and reality. By suggesting that our ordinary consciousness is not the only valid form of awareness, but rather a useful evolutionary adaptation with specific limitations, Huxley opens the possibility of a more expansive understanding of human experience and potential. As we continue to explore the nature of consciousness in both scientific and philosophical realms, Huxley's insights remind us that our ordinary perception may be just the tip of an iceberg, a useful but limited view of a much vaster reality. The doors of perception remain partially closed for most of us, most of the time, but perhaps with greater awareness of their existence, we might occasionally glimpse what lies beyond them, enriching our understanding of both ourselves and the world we inhabit. In Huxley's own words, to be shaken out of the ruts of ordinary perception, to be shown for a few timeless hours the outer and inner world, not as they appear to an animal obsessed with survival or to a human being obsessed with words and notions, but as they are apprehended directly and unconditionally by mind at large, this is an experience of inestimable value to everyone, and especially to the intellectual. Perhaps in this observation lies an invitation, not necessarily to follow Huxley's exact path, but to question the boundaries of our perception and to wonder what might lie just beyond the doors we have yet to open. The legacy of Huxley's exploration extends beyond philosophy into practical questions about how we might live more complete and authentic lives. If our ordinary consciousness is indeed a limited slice of a much broader potential awareness, how might we design our educational systems, our social structures, and our personal practices to allow for a more balanced relationship with these different modes of perception? How might we retain the practical benefits of our reducing valve while also cultivating access to the broader awareness that lies beyond it? As we face unprecedented global challenges, from climate change to social fragmentation, the expansion of our collective perception beyond narrow utilitarian concerns may be not just philosophically interesting, but practically necessary. The ability to perceive our fundamental interconnectedness, to experience empathy beyond the boundaries of the individual ego, and to access creative insights beyond our ordinary thinking patterns could be essential resources for navigating our complex future. In the end, Huxley's exploration of the doors of perception invites us to consider that the greatest unexplored frontier may not lie in outer space or in the depths of the ocean, but in the vast realms of consciousness that exist beyond our ordinary awareness, realms that may be accessible through the cleansing of the doors of perception that typically limit our experience to a narrow band of utilitarian awareness. The journey beyond these doors may be the most profound exploration possible. A journey not away from reality but deeper into it, revealing the world not as we think it is, but as it truly is: infinite, interconnected, and alive with meaning.